You did what? I shouted, my voice cracking from both age and betrayal. I stood there in the center of what used to be my barn, now nothing but an empty skeleton. The dusty wind blew through the broken beams and empty stalls. My legs shook under me, not just from the lingering effects of the stroke I just recovered from, but from the gut-wrenching truth my neighbor had just revealed. Your son, he sold the farm, Jack, Earl muttered, almost too ashamed to say it out loud. While you were lying there in the hospital. Said you weren't coming back. Signed the papers and everything. The cane dropped from my hand. I fell to my knees, my chest heaving. My land. My legacy. The place my late wife and I built from the ground up with our bare hands. Gone. Not stolen by strangers, but sold by my only son. And right there, I made a decision. If he thought he could steal my life's work and walk away with a fortune when I'm gone, he had another thing coming. I still had one card left to play. I still had the documents no one knew existed. The inheritance. His inheritance. Not anymore. They say betrayal doesn't come from enemies, it comes from those you love. And that makes it cut 10 times deeper. But before we get to the revenge, the heartbreak, and the revelation that would tear my family apart forever, let me take you back. Back to where it all began. Before my body failed me. Before the knives came out. Before I realized my only son had turned into a man I no longer recognized. It all started 6 months ago. I was still strong then, well, strong enough for 79. Every morning, I'd rise with the sun, tie my worn leather boots, and take a deep breath of that sweet country air. My farm wasn't the biggest, but it was mine. Acres of cornfields, a red barn older than most marriages, and the same rusted tractor I'd fixed more times than I could count. I raised my son Henry here. Taught him how to dig, plant, build. Thought I was teaching him values. Integrity. But maybe all I taught him was how to take. He hadn't been around much lately. After his mother passed, he moved to the city. Said he needed space to grow. Became some kind of real estate man. Slick suits. Shiny cars. Always in a rush. I only saw him on holidays when he'd come down in his expensive cologne and give me that rehearsed, half-hearted hug. But one day he showed up unannounced. Dad, you need to think about retirement, he said, sipping that overpriced coffee he always brought. You're pushing 80. You shouldn't be working yourself into the grave. I'll work this land until my last breath, I told him, grinning through cracked lips. He laughed, but there was no warmth in it. That's what I'm afraid of. I should have known then. I should have seen the glint in his eye, not concern, but calculation. A few weeks later, it happened. A stroke. Out of nowhere. Collapsed right beside the chicken coop. Lucky Earl found me in time and rushed me to the hospital. Spent 3 weeks in a cold, white bed. Doctors said it was a miracle I made it. But the real heart attack was waiting for me back home. When I got out, the locks had changed. My keys didn't work. I called Henry. Oh, right, he said, not even pretending to be surprised. Dad, you weren't supposed to be discharged for another week. Why the hell don't my keys work? He hesitated. Then came the sentence that shattered my world. Because I sold the farm. I thought I'd misheard him. What did you just say? I sold it, Dad. Look, I know you're angry, but this is for the best. That place was falling apart. You couldn't handle it anymore. I screamed so loud the phone slipped from my hand. My breath came in short gasps. I thought I was having another stroke right there. I was homeless. Betrayed by the same boy I used to carry on my shoulders. He offered to set me up in some assisted living home. Some cold, lifeless building with strangers and sponge baths. I told him to go to hell. For a while, I stayed with Earl. Slept in his trailer, ate canned beans, and stared at the ceiling, wondering how I got here. But then, I remembered something. Something no one else knew. My wife, God rest her soul, had always been afraid of what money did to people. So when we got that settlement back in '96 from that pipeline deal the state ran through our land, she made me promise to put it away. Quietly. Secretly. I'd buried the paperwork in a safety deposit box. A trust fund. Not in Henry's name. Not in mine either. But I still had control over it. $580,000. He didn't know it existed. And I wasn't about to let him have a single damn dime of it. He took my home? Fine. I'd take his future. And I'd make sure he knew it. But not yet. First, I had to play the fool. Let him think he won. Let him think the old man was broken, finished, crawling into his grave. That's when I started the plan. One that would unravel everything he thought he had. And it began with an envelope I mailed. addressed to his own son. Henry had no idea what he'd started. While he was busy showing off his new luxury condo to his friends in the city, bought with the blood and bones of my farm, I was setting my trap. Not out of spite. Not even revenge, really. It was about dignity. About reminding him and myself that I was still the man who built something from nothing. That I wasn't a burden to be discarded. I was his father. And he would learn what happens when you forget who raised you. The letter I sent was simple, handwritten, addressed to my grandson, Caleb. He was only 19. Just starting college. A smart, quiet boy. He always had more of my blood in him than his father did. I used to take him fishing when he was younger, before Henry stopped visiting altogether. Caleb had a good heart, still pure, still moldable. Inside the envelope I wrote, "Dear Caleb, I know your father hasn't told you the truth, but there are things you deserve to know. Meet me at the place we caught that catfish the summer before your mom passed. Saturday, 10 a.m. Come alone. Grandpa Jack." I didn't know if he'd come, but he did. I was already sitting at the riverbank when I heard footsteps behind me. The same spot we used to fish when he was just a boy with a Mickey Mouse rod and a bucket of worms. He looked taller now, stronger, but his eyes still had that same gentle curiosity. "Grandpa," he said softly. I turned slowly, my bones creaking in protest. "You came." "I almost didn't," he admitted. "Dad said you were not well. He said you lost it." I chuckled bitterly. "Oh, I've lost a few things, all right. My land, my pride, my trust. But my mind? That's still sharper than a switchblade." He sat beside me, unsure. I could feel the tension radiating off him. "Do you know what your father did while I was in the hospital?" He frowned. "He said you asked him to handle things. That the farm was draining money." I nodded. "And did he tell you he sold it? Behind my back? That he cashed in the land your grandma and I spent 50 years building without even telling me?" Caleb's jaw clenched. "Let me show you something," I said, reaching into my coat and pulling out a worn manila envelope. Inside were the trust documents, the deed to the land I bought up north, the bank statements. He looked through them in silence, eyes widening. This is a fortune," he whispered. "Yours now," I said calmly. "What? That money was never meant for your father. He's already proven what he'd do with it. You? You still have a chance to do good. That land I bought in Vermont? It's in your name now. I transferred it last week. All legal. I made Earl the witness. Henry will never see a dime." He was speechless. "I didn't ask you here to pick sides, Caleb. I asked you here because I need you to understand something. Legacy isn't about blood. It's about values. Your dad forgot that. I'm hoping you won't." Caleb stared at the water, breathing slowly. "He's going to lose his mind when he finds out." I grinned. "That's the idea." Back in town, the vultures had already come. Developers tearing down my old barn. The fence posts gone. Even the old oak tree chopped down. They were planning some fancy resort for tourists. They had no idea the foundation they were building on was soaked in betrayal. I went back one last time, just to walk the land, to say goodbye. That's when I saw her, Anna. She was standing by the edge of the field, arms crossed, wind tugging at her silver hair. She'd been my neighbor for 40 years. We'd buried our spouses the same year, laughed together, cried together, but never crossed that line. Until now. "I heard what Henry did," she said quietly. I nodded. "Everyone has, it seems." She looked at me, eyes glistening. "And I heard what you did." I smiled. "Guess I still got some fight left in me." She took a deep breath. "I always admired that about you." We stood in silence for a moment, watching the wind roll across the empty fields like ghosts of the past. Then she touched my hand. "You could come stay at my place, just until you figure out your next move." It was the kind of offer that carried more weight than the words themselves. A door opening, a second chance. "I'd like that," I said. But peace didn't last long. A week later I got a call. Henry, raging, screaming. "You changed the trust?" he yelled. "You gave everything to Caleb?" I stayed silent. "You crazy old man. After everything I did for you. You sold my farm," I said calmly. "It was for your own good." "No," I said, voice cold now. It was for your own wallet. I'm your son, Dad. And I was your father. Silence. I hope you enjoy your condo, I said, then hung up. I thought that would be the end of it. But it was only the beginning. 2 days later, Caleb called me, panic in his voice. Grandpa, Dad showed up at my dorm. He was yelling. Said I betrayed him. That I'd regret it. What did you say? I told him I chose the person who never lied to me. I sat back in my chair, heart swelling with pride. But then Caleb's voice dropped. Grandpa, I think he's going to do something. Something bad. And just like that, the storm I thought had passed came roaring back. The wind rattled the windows of Anna's old farmhouse as I sat at her kitchen table, staring at my hands. They were still strong, though a little more gnarled now, like the roots of an old tree that had seen too many storms. I knew the signs. I'd lived long enough to recognize what a man looks like when he's about to explode, and my son was ticking like a bomb. Anna set a cup of coffee in front of me. You should call the police. I shook my head. For what? He hasn't done anything illegal. Yet. She sat across from me, folding her hands on the table. But you think he will? I didn't answer, but my silence was loud enough. Henry was always ambitious, even as a child. But now, ambition had turned into desperation. He was backed into a corner, watching the fortune he thought was his slip through his fingers. That's when men like him became dangerous. Not because they were bold, but because they were entitled. That night I didn't sleep. I stayed up staring out the window, the moonlight casting long shadows across Anna's front porch. Every creak of the floorboards, every gust of wind made my spine stiffen. I wasn't scared for myself, but I was scared for Caleb. If Henry was desperate enough to track down his own son at college, who knew what he'd do next? The next day I drove to town. Not to confront Henry, not yet. I went to see an old friend, Mitchell Boyd, former county sheriff, now retired and managing the hardware store. He owed me more than a few favors. You're telling me your son's gone off the deep end? Mitch asked, leaning against the counter, chewing on a toothpick. I'm telling you he's unstable, paranoid, and furious. I've got a bad feeling, Mitch. He scratched his chin. You want me to have someone keep eyes on him? I nodded. Quietly. I don't want Caleb getting spooked. Consider it done, Mitch said. But if you think something's coming, Jack, maybe it's time you made your move first. That stuck with me. I've been reacting this whole time, letting Henry dictate the pace, letting him strike first. But no more. It was time to remind him who taught him how to fight. I called a meeting. Just me, Caleb, and Anna. We sat around her table like it was a war room. Because in a way, it was. I think he's going to try to challenge the trust, I said. Claim I'm not of sound mind. Maybe try to get it reversed in court. Can he do that? Caleb asked, worry in his eyes. Not if we act now, I said. I want to finalize the transfer of the Vermont land. Lock it in legally. Get your name on the deed, the bank accounts, everything. That way, even if he tries something, he'll be too late. Anna nodded. We'll drive up there tomorrow. I have a friend who works at the county registrar's office. She can push the paperwork through fast. Caleb smiled faintly, but it didn't reach his eyes. I still don't understand how Dad ended up like this. I looked at him for a long moment. Because somewhere along the way, he stopped seeing people as family and started seeing them as assets. We left at dawn. The drive to Vermont was long, winding through forests and mountain passes. The land I'd bought years ago was untouched. Acres of rolling green hills, a freshwater stream, and a small, weathered cabin that hadn't seen life in decades. I planned to leave it to Caleb for when he was ready to build, to raise a family, to start over. But now it was becoming something else. A line in the sand. By sunset, the deed was signed. Caleb was the legal owner of every acre. The trust was emptied into a new account jointly held by Caleb and his future foundation, which I helped him write up. A scholarship fund in his mother's name. I watched him sign the last page with steady hands. You're going to do good with this, I said. I promise, he whispered. That night, we stayed in the cabin. We ate canned beans by a small campfire and told stories about my wife, about Caleb's mom, about fishing lines and stubborn tractors, and how love used to look like dirt under the fingernails. It was the most peace I'd felt in years. Until the peace shattered. The next morning we found the windshield of my truck smashed in. Glass scattered like frost. And on the hood scrawled in red paint. "You stole from me." I didn't need a signature. I knew exactly who wrote it. Henry had found us. We called the police, filed a report, and drove back to town. But something in me had changed. I wasn't going to wait anymore. I went straight to his place. A slick, sterile condo in the city. Everything spotless, fake, empty. Like the version of himself he tried so hard to project. He opened the door, stunned to see me. "Dad?" I stepped in without asking. "I see you found Vermont," I said, voice like gravel. "Was it satisfying? Vandalizing your father's truck?" His jaw clenched. "I didn't touch your damn truck." I stared at him. The way he looked away was all the confirmation I needed. "You always did like taking the shortcut. But this time you went too far. You stole what was mine," he barked. "That money, that land, you were going to leave it to me." "No, Henry," I said slowly. "I was going to entrust it to you. But trust is something you earn. And you lost that the day you sold my farm. I was protecting you." "From what?" "My own life." He stepped closer, his face red with rage. "You'd rather give everything to a kid than your own son?" "Yes," I said without hesitation. "Because he still knows how to build. And all you've learned how to do is take." He flinched. Just slightly. "You're not getting it, Henry," I said, turning for the door. "There's no inheritance anymore. There's only legacy. And you threw yours away." Back home, I tried to settle back into something resembling normal. But I couldn't shake the feeling that Henry wasn't done. A week passed. Then two. And then came the envelope. Delivered by courier. Thick paper. No return address. Inside? A court summons. Henry was suing me for mental incapacity, seeking to reverse the trust changes and seize control of the estate. He was taking me to court. The final war had begun. The courtroom was cold. Not in temperature, but in spirit. The kind of cold that settles into your bones, not because of the air, but because of what's at stake. Because of the people staring at you from across the aisle, people who used to be family. I sat in the plaintiff's chair, shoulders squared, cane resting against my leg. Caleb sat beside me, dressed in a simple navy suit, hands clasped tightly in his lap. Across from us sat Henry, flanked by his shark-eyed attorney and his new wife, a woman half his age who wouldn't even look me in the eye. Henry didn't look like my son anymore. He looked like a man at war with his own blood. The judge, an older woman with tired eyes and no time for theatrics, called the court to order. And just like that, the show began. Henry's lawyer rose first. "Your Honor, we intend to demonstrate that Jack Collins, though once a capable and successful farmer, is no longer of sound mind. That he made rash and emotionally compromised financial decisions under the influence of manipulation. And that, had he been in his right mind, he would not have disinherited his only son." A low murmur rippled through the gallery. A few local reporters were present. The drama of a father-son inheritance battle was too tempting. But I sat still, calm, because I knew what they didn't. I was prepared. They brought in witnesses. A family doctor who hadn't seen me in over a year. Claimed I had signs of early cognitive decline. A neighbor who said I'd become paranoid after the hospital stay. Even a psychiatrist who had never once spoken to me in person testified based on medical notes he'd barely read. It was all smoke, all shadow, and none of it could erase the truth. Then it was my turn. I stood slowly, gripping my cane, walking with purpose to the witness stand. "Mr. Collins," the judge said, "do you understand what's being asked of you today?" "I do, Your Honor." "Would you like to respond to the claims made by your son?" I nodded. Then I looked right at Henry. "When I was 23, I began. I bought a piece of land no one wanted. Rocks, weeds, and debt. I cleared it with my own hands. I built a farm, a home, a life." I paused. "And I raised a son who grew up knowing how hard that was. Who watched me break my back for decades. And who, when I got sick, sold it all before I was even out of the hospital bed." I turned to the judge. He says I'm not in my right mind. But I ask you, Your Honor, what kind of father would be in his right mind after something like that? Silence. Then I added, everything I did was legal, transparent, and documented. I'm not confused. I'm not impaired. I'm heartbroken. But I am not incompetent. My voice cracked just slightly, but it was enough. Then my lawyer called the next witness. Caleb. He stood tall, taller than I remembered. Your Honor, he said, voice clear. I've been with my grandfather every step of this process. He's sharp. He's thorough. He helped me start a non-profit foundation in my mom's name. He set up a land conservation plan. He even made me read every line of the trust twice before signing anything. The judge raised an eyebrow. Why do you think your father is pursuing this case? Caleb didn't flinch. Because he's not mad about the trust being changed. He's mad he didn't get to control it. My dad doesn't see legacy. He sees leverage. I felt tears prick my eyes. That boy had more strength than I'd ever realized. The final blow came from an unexpected place. Anna, she asked to testify, stood proudly before the court and told them how she'd watched me recover, how she'd sat with me through the nights when I cried about the farm, how I walked with her every morning, handled my own finances, wrote letters, told stories, made plans. I've known Jack for 40 years, she said, and I can tell you with certainty he's not losing his mind. He's just finally taking back control of it. That was the moment the tide turned. You could see it in the judge's eyes. Henry knew it too. He sat back, jaw tight, and for the first time, he looked afraid. The court adjourned. The judge needed a few days to deliberate. But we knew the truth. Justice had already chosen its side. Outside the courtroom, as we walked down the steps, Henry followed. You think this is over? He hissed behind me. You think this wins you some kind of moral prize? I stopped. Turned. No, I said. It wins me peace. He laughed bitterly. You're a stubborn old man who's going to die alone. I stepped forward inches from his face. And you're a grown man who sold his father's land and now has to live with what that makes him. He opened his mouth, but I raised a hand. I buried your mother with my own hands, I said. Don't think for 1 second I won't bury your name if you keep pushing. He stepped back like I'd hit him. And that's when Caleb stepped between us. Dad, he said, leave him alone. Henry looked between us, his father and his son, and saw, finally, that the war was over. He walked away without another word. A week later, the judge made her ruling. The trust stood. The land remained with Caleb. Henry was denied all claims. And I was free. Anna and I spent the following month renovating the old cabin in Vermont. Caleb helped on weekends. We planted apple trees, painted the porch, and watched the sunrise over hills that no one could ever steal again. And one evening, as the sun dipped low, casting everything in gold, Anna took my hand. You did it, she whispered. No, I said. We did. Then I looked at Caleb hammering a nail into the new shed. He did. Because he'd taken the worst of us and built something better. But just when we thought the dust had settled, something happened that none of us expected. A letter. From Henry. Handwritten. And what it said changed everything. The envelope was plain. No return address. Just my name in sharp, hurried pen strokes across the front. Jack Collins. Anna found it in the mailbox and brought it inside, her brow furrowed. I took one look at it and already knew. Henry's handwriting hadn't changed since he was 12, still angular, still pressed too hard like the paper had done something wrong. I didn't open it right away. I stared at it while the kettle hissed on the stove, while the old grandfather clock in the living room ticked away the seconds. Caleb sat across from me, silent. He'd learned not to push me. He could see the storm brewing just behind my eyes. Finally, I broke the seal. And I read, Dad, I was wrong. Not just about the trust or the land. About everything. I've spent my whole life trying to be someone. Trying to prove I wasn't just the farmer's son. That I could outgrow your shadow. I didn't realize until too late that your shadow was the only shelter I ever really had. I don't expect forgiveness. But I hope someday you'll believe me when I say I'm sorry. If there's anything left of the man you once saw in me, let me prove it. One last time. Your son. Henry. I set the letter down. The room was too quiet. Caleb reached across the table. Do you believe him? I didn't answer. Because the truth was I didn't know. This man, my son, had burned every bridge. He had watched me suffer in a hospital bed and used that moment of weakness to take everything I built. But now here he was asking for something I'd never expected from him, a second chance. And damn it, against all logic, part of me wanted to give it to him. A few days later, he showed up. No announcement. No warning. Just the sound of a car crunching up the gravel drive as we were out back clearing some brush by the cabin. I looked up and saw him standing beside his car, alone, no lawyer, no smirk, no swagger. Just Henry. He walked up slowly like he knew this was sacred ground now. I got your letter, I said. He nodded, eyes lowered. I meant every word. Say it to me, I said. He looked up. I'm sorry, Dad. I was wrong. About the farm. About the trust. About you. I said nothing. He swallowed. I was scared. I was losing control of my job, my finances, my marriage, and I thought the only way to survive was to hold onto something that wasn't mine anymore. Caleb stood to the side, arms folded, watching like a hawk. He wasn't going to forgive easily, and I didn't blame him. Henry turned to him. I'm sorry, Caleb. I was jealous of what he gave you. But now I see you earned it. Caleb didn't respond. But he didn't walk away either. That was something. I told Henry to stay for dinner. Not because I trusted him, but because I wanted to see if this was real or just another performance. He didn't try to talk business. He didn't ask for money. He didn't even mention the court case. He just sat there, peeling potatoes with Caleb in silence like he was trying to rewind the clock. Later that night, after Caleb went to bed, I found Henry sitting on the porch. He looked older. Not just in the face, but in the soul. I lost everything, he said. I sat beside him. No, you didn't. You just forgot what mattered. He looked at me. Can I ever fix it? I thought for a long time before I answered. I don't know. That's up to you. But if you're here to start rebuilding, you can pick up a shovel tomorrow morning. We're expanding the orchard. He smiled faintly. I'll be there. The next morning he showed up in work boots and old jeans just like I used to wear when I first bought the farm. He didn't complain. Didn't take breaks. Just worked. One day turned into 2. Then a week. Then 3. And slowly, something happened I hadn't dared to hope for. Caleb forgave him. Not all at once. But in little ways. A joke. A shared lunch. A project they planned together. They were never going to be best friends. But they started to look like family again. I watched it all like a man witnessing spring after a long, brutal winter. But I wasn't naive. I knew Henry still had demons. And one of them, one he hadn't told us about, was coming to collect. It happened on a Tuesday. I was in the shed organizing some old tools when I heard the argument from the driveway. Henry was shouting. A woman's voice shouted back. I stepped outside and saw her, his ex-wife. Red heels, sunglasses, and a fury in her expression that could curdle milk. You think you can just disappear? She screamed. Do you know how deep in debt we are? I'm trying to make things right. Henry yelled. With what? A garden and a cabin? You gave away your last asset, Henry. You gave it away. I stepped in. That's enough. She turned to me. This is all your fault. You're the reason he gave everything to that golden boy instead of fixing the mess we were in. Ma'am, I said calmly, you need to leave. Now. She glared at me. Don't think you've seen the last of this. Then she left, tires kicking up gravel like gunfire. Henry just stood there, shaking. I didn't tell you everything, he said. She leveraged the last of our joint accounts to cover her business loans. I'm still liable. I could lose what little I have left. Are you saying you're in danger? I asked. He nodded slowly. They're coming after me. And I don't have anything left to give them. I stared at him. The old Jack Collins would have told him, not my problem. But this wasn't about land anymore. It was about redemption. And maybe about doing right by my son now that he was finally trying to do right by himself. So I made a decision. A final gift. Not in cash. Not in property. But in dignity. I called a meeting with my lawyer. I had something new drawn up. And what I gave to Henry that week didn't make him rich, but it gave him a chance. A small home near the cabin. A modest trust, not enough to squander, but enough to survive. And a condition. If he ever tried to take more, it would all revert to Caleb's foundation. I handed him the papers. He looked at me, speechless. I'm not giving this to who you were, I said. I'm giving it to who you're becoming. Tears welled in his eyes. Thank you. You still have to earn it. I will. That night, I sat on the porch watching Caleb and Henry plant one last apple tree side by side. Not friends. Not enemies. Just two men. Trying to rebuild what had been broken. But deep in my gut, I felt it. A storm was still brewing, and none of us were ready for what would strike next. The wind howled that night, slapping against the cabin like it was trying to get in. The air had way too thick, restless. I couldn't sleep, so I sat by the window with a cup of black coffee, watching the orchard trees sway like old dancers in the dark. Henry had been here for nearly 2 months. He'd earned back my trust, one heavy shovel at a time. Caleb had grown to respect him again. And I, for the first time in a long while, began to believe that maybe, just maybe, a family once broken could be repaired. But life, as I'd learned too well, doesn't grant happy endings without a final trial. And ours came at dawn. The knock on the door was hard. Urgent. I opened it to find a U.S. Marshal standing there, stone-faced. Are you Jack Collins? I am. We're here for your son, Henry Collins. Is he inside? I didn't ask questions. I just called out to Henry, who came down the stairs in his work boots, bleary-eyed and confused. The moment he saw the badge, his face paled like the blood had drained right out of him. Henry Collins, the marshal said. You're under arrest for financial fraud, embezzlement, and obstruction of a federal investigation. You have the right to remain silent. I could barely hear the rest. My heart was pounding too loud. Wait, what is this? Caleb yelled, coming in from the porch. Henry held up his hands, surrendering peacefully. I didn't think it would catch up to me this fast. What did you do? I demanded. Henry looked right at me. Before the divorce, before the sale. I used some of the farm's value to prop up a failed real estate investment. I falsified the valuation. It wasn't just unethical, it was illegal. I thought I could fix it before anyone noticed. But when everything fell apart, I sold the farm to cover the hole. I thought that would protect me. It didn't. I felt sick. You let me believe this was all about the land, I said. All this time, you knew. He nodded. I wanted to tell you. But I was ashamed. And scared. Caleb's jaw was tight, fists clenched at his side. You used us, he said quietly. Again. No, Henry pleaded. Not this time. I was done lying. I've been working, trying to make things right. I didn't know the feds had found out. I swear to you, I was trying to be better. The marshal motioned. We have to go. I looked at my son, and then I did something no one expected. I stepped forward and hugged him. Not tightly, not warmly, but enough. Enough to say, I see the man you tried to be, even if you failed. He broke down in my arms, and then they took him away. The cabin felt haunted after that. Empty even with Caleb and Anna still there. We didn't talk much that week. Grief isn't always about death. It's about broken hopes, too. But on the 7th day, a letter arrived. From prison. Dad, they've given me 5 years. Maybe less with good behavior. Strange thing is, I'm not angry. I finally feel like I've stopped running. In here, I've got a job. I'm teaching other inmates basic accounting. Can you believe that? Me, teaching the very thing I misused. Tell Caleb I'm proud of him. I know he'll keep the land safe. I know he'll be better than I ever was. And tell Anna thank you for always being the calm in the chaos. I don't expect you to write back. But if you ever do, I'll be here, working, waiting, changing. Your son, Henry. I didn't write back. Not right away. I read that letter every morning for a week. Sat with it. Felt its weight. And then one morning I got up before the sun, walked down to the orchard where the last tree we planted together stood and thought about the legacy we leave behind. Not the money. Not the land. But the choices. And I made mine. I wrote him back. Just 2 words. Keep going. A year passed. Then another. Caleb took over the daily running of the land. He expanded the foundation, started hosting troubled teens during the summers to teach them farming and woodworking. He became the man I'd hoped to raise and more. Anna and I found a rhythm too. Quiet mornings. Long walks. Coffee by the fire. We'd earned this peace. But I never stopped thinking about Henry. The day he was released, I waited at the prison gate. He stepped out looking thinner, older, but clear-eyed. Sober in every sense of the word. I didn't think you'd come, he said. I shrugged. I never was good at staying angry forever. We rode back together in silence. He didn't ask for anything. Just listened to the trees and the wind and the gravel under the tires. When we got to the cabin, Caleb was already waiting. Henry stepped out, took a deep breath, and walked up to his son. Caleb extended his hand, and Henry took it. Just like that. The seasons passed again. Henry stayed nearby, built a small cabin with his own hands on the back ridge, helped when needed, stayed out of the spotlight, humble. And one day he came to me with an idea. I want to start a financial literacy program for ex-cons, he said. Teach them what I didn't know, what I ignored. Help them rebuild. I smiled. Then that land I set aside for the barn extension? It's yours. He blinked. Seriously. Call it penance. For both of us. He teared up. But he didn't say thank you. He just worked. Now I sit here, writing this in the same chair where I once stared at Henry's first letter. The apple trees are blooming again. The orchard is full. 3 generations of Collins men have walked the soil. 2 made terrible mistakes. 1 chose to forgive. Because life isn't about avoiding the fall. It's about what you build when you stand back up. Don't let betrayal harden you. Let it sharpen you. Let it teach you the power of boundaries, the strength and grace, and the unshakable truth that sometimes the best revenge is healing, and letting the next harvest be better than the last.